Good day. Welcome to Peterborough Matters. My name is Paul Rellinger, and of course, my guest this week, as it is as she is every week, is Mayor Diane Therrien. Diane, we've been chatting, and rightly so, about all things COVID, and it's funny how that conversation has kind of evolved over the last month or so, from a situation where about a month ago we really weren't seeing the number of cases hold steady for our local region. So maybe we can start with some good news right off the top. Um, that number has been holding steady at in and around 73, 74 positive cases, most of which are resolved. Uh, we hear the term flattening of the curve, but we're starting to see that here a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because we just came out of the May long weekend. I know back in April there was some concerns about the Easter long weekend and potentially seeing a spike after that if folks were traveling or still having those gatherings. There was a bit of an increase, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I think some of us were worried that it might be.
Mhm.
So I know that that's a concern that folks have had around this past long weekend as well, in terms of family gatherings, and are people going to their cottages, and are they going to be abiding by physical distancing? But I'm hopeful. I remain optimistic that people have been getting the message. And so folks that, maybe came through and did go up to a cottage on the long weekend were doing, what they've been asked to do and stocking up before they got here and then just staying there, by themselves. So again, because the incubation period can be up to 14 days, it'll be interesting to see about where we are this time next week. 6 days is the sort of average on which symptoms present themselves. But I was out, we were chatting a little bit about this before we came online. This weekend, a lot of folks were out because the weather was decent, and I didn't see a lot of parties happening or big gatherings. People were sort of doing their thing in their yard or walking their dogs, and were very respectful of, again, that physical distancing piece. So I think hopefully people were, responsible, and the numbers will continue to stay kind of flat, because as we've been saying, and I feel like a broken record, but the sooner that people are abiding by this and the stricter that they are about doing it now, the sooner we can kind of go back to some type of normalcy. And if people aren't doing that, then we're stuck here even longer, and nobody wants to be stuck in the house throughout the whole summer.
What's it tell you about Peterborough? What's it say about Peterborough again? As you said, and I was out on the weekend, really just in our neighborhood, and I saw much the same as you described. Um, I mean, when we look at numbers across the province in similar sized municipalities, it could change tomorrow, but we've done fairly well. Um, are Peterborough residents just good listeners, or are the people giving the message just doing a good job of doing that, or is it a bit of both?
I think,
People seem to be listening.
yeah, it's a bit of both for sure. I mean, Peterborough's the kind of city, and the county as well. It's the type of community that comes together in times of adversity. We also are very fortunate to have, Dr. Salvatera, the medical officer of health, and her team, who have been working tirelessly on top of all the other responsibilities that they have. They've been very good at updating folks about numbers, about best practices, about how the testing's going, how, what that looks like. I know that myself and the county warden, and we've worked a lot with MPP Smith in particular, and some of the other county representatives, and our federal counterparts, to try to get those messages out there. And then you're also hearing them, again, the news media. So thank you to Kojako and Kawartha Now, and all those folks in town that are doing that same type of work in terms of getting the message out there in as many different ways as you possibly can. So yeah, you're right. It's a bit of both. I think certainly too, our community is lucky in that we have really good, strong local media, a lot of folks that are really active on social media, and then just the word of mouth. People are chatting with their neighbors when they walk the dog, or even if they don't know them that well, and just passing on what they're hearing. So there's a lot of factors playing into it, but we need to keep we just need to keep holding strong.
You brought up a very good point there when you mentioned Dr. Salvatierra. People seem to forget in all this COVID excitement, for sake of a better word, that it was just a year ago that the Ford government was looking at possibly amalgamating our health unit with another area health unit, which would mean, maybe a loss of some services here locally. Are we ever glad now that didn't happen?
Yeah, and I know that Premier Ford has been, had some things to say about health units even in the last couple of weeks, which is unfortunate. And so, kind of hoping that out of this pandemic, his government would realize how important it is to have those local representatives and people that are actually in the community to respond to these different health issues, because it would be very different if Peterborough and the health unit covers a large geographic area. And so getting talked, like when we hear about being lumped in with the Durham region or all of Eastern Ontario, it changes the way that they're able to respond to different community needs. It changes what different priorities are, because a large center like Oshawa and Durham region there, it has more in common with, I would say, the broader GTA than with Peterborough. Arguably, we would have more in common with a city like Kingston, but then that's also a 3-hour, drive for the people that are working in those fields. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But the work of the health units all across the province have been, I think, extraordinary and really helped us get through this in a way that, it could have gone very differently.
And staying with that theme a little bit, is it your sense that public perception and appreciation of the health unit has only heightened as a result of all this?
That's a good question. I mean, I know, because the health unit also they have so many responsibilities that they do behind the scenes that people don't necessarily see. And so the COVID, crisis has put Rosanna in a very, public role, and she's been speaking a lot about that. I think I've heard, nothing but good things about the health unit and the work that they're doing. And again, recognizing that there still is a lot of work going on behind the scenes that isn't COVID related and is just part of their normal mandate. So it's been interesting to learn more about how they respond to these crises and how important they are for communities like ours to have that representation locally.
And you bring up a good point that the other stuff just doesn't go away. COVID is the focus, certainly, as it should be. But the other programs don't go away. And that's the same for the city too, at the municipal level. I mean, I know we've touched on this, but I think people really need to understand that the business of running the city can't be put on hold. And therein lies the challenge, not only for council, but certainly for staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had, there's been less council committee meetings. Just there's been, some business is hard to move forward in this time. The changes that were announced by the provincial government around development and construction and that those type of industries will ensure that some of that can get up and running again. I know that there was questions about, development permits and approvals, and that still is moving forward. We're going to have to figure out how to have public meetings under the Planning Act. So there's kind of those types of issues that we're sorting through and figuring out the best way to do it. But again, we still need to be making sure that we're having our essential services moving on. And then also planning for, the gradual reopening that we're hearing about. So what is it going to look like if we are able to reopen some splash pads or those types of facilities? It won't be in the next month, but how do we make sure that staff are on top of that and that we have the people that we need for those types of things? So, yeah.
I know you've been involved in discussions and consultation with the county warden, J. Murray Jones. Give us an update on how that's been beneficial through all of this, just keeping that line of communication open, because the county obviously has different challenges than the municipality does, the city, but yet there are many commonalities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jay and I have had many conversations over the last couple months, and as well as a lot of the other township mayors. Um, Again, weekly, there's calls with MPP Smith and MP Monsef, and so lately, I mean, their big challenge and concern has been around the seasonal residents that the county has. So it's a little bit different than Peterborough, although a lot of those folks that are coming through have been stopping and shopping at Costco or the Walmart or those facilities in town. So um, basically, we've just had a really good ongoing line of communication, and I've tried to, make sure that we're on the same page for messaging. So when, we put out commercials encouraging people to stay home if they can, if you're coming up to your cottage, to bring what you need with you and not to frequent the liquor store or the foodlands or those, smaller places. You're not going to be able to reach everyone, but it is helpful to have a coordinated message. And again, folks that live in the county need to come into the city to do a lot of work and shopping and business as well. So we're just trying to look out for everybody as best as we can.
It may be premature at this point, but have you heard anything from Jay Murray about, from the warden, about how the weekend went in terms of cottage traffic, and were people complying? Do we know anything as of this point how that went?
I haven't heard anything yet, but I'm sure I will on our call this week. I know with the reopening of boat launches and some of those facilities that there was a bit of a concern about how many folks would be trying to access those. So yeah, I mean, I think again, people have been, not everyone, but a lot of people have been good about, if they're coming up, they bring their stuff, they just hole up in their cottage for the weekend, and they aren't having company over and that kind of thing. So we'll certainly stay tuned on that matter.
And yeah, you're right. It's something we're going to have to watch moving forward, especially as you know, with the nicer weather coming up. You're watching Peterborough Matters here on your TV. We'll be right back right after this. We're back on Peterborough Matters. I'm with Mayor Diane Therrien. Forgive me, I didn't ask you, because I like to make it a habit of doing this at the top of the show, is how are you doing? I understand you were out on the weekend getting a little bit of exercise too.
I was. It showed me how out of shape I am. But yeah, we got the bikes out on the weekend and went for a little bit of a bike ride. And yeah, so it was nice to actually have some decent weather. Again, saw lots of people out and about being active, and the dogs got a couple of long walks, which they really enjoyed. But yeah, other than that, fairly low key, since ideally on a Victoria Day long weekend, there would be the fireworks, which were online, which was interesting, and would have gone out for dinner and couldn't do that kind of thing. So you just make the best of the situation.
Yeah, and a shout out, if I could, to I know your TV was involved. Peterborough Strong, COVID was held on Saturday night. Fantastic job. Great 2 hours of entertainment. Peterborough entertainment, which is the best. Again, an example of one of those things where the community comes together, and we talk about it all the time, and sometimes it's, people say we talk about it too much, but Peterborough really does come together, and that was a good example of that.
Yeah, there's been a few of those over the last couple of years where I hear from people who are part of the organizing committee that they reach out to different artists or musicians or people that could host or do stand up, and everybody that they ask says yes. And that they want to be a part of these these fundraising efforts, these awareness building shows, this entertainment for folks that Otherwise, we haven't seen live music in a long time. I know that a lot of us really miss that.
We
So
do.
it's been exactly, and it's been really interesting to see a lot of artists do the Facebook streaming, Instagram streaming kind of concert, which is an interesting way to have adapted to the situation. But I think the COVID show on Saturday was also a really good example of how we use modern technology to be able to pull together people from all across the city and county and get that out into people's homes. So
one of the big developments over the last week has been the reopening of certain businesses, part of phase one of the province's plan, much anticipated. An encouraging sign. What's that looked like in Peterborough from what you've been able to gauge so far? And when I say that, I mean just in terms of, is this phase one something the municipality monitors carefully to see how it goes and where it's going, and give us some sense of the municipality's involvement in that phase one as directed by the province?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so as a municipality, we don't have the same level of authority as the province, obviously, and we have some enforcement mechanisms in terms of if we're getting complaints about businesses not complying with some of the, physical distancing or those types of things. But mostly we're here to try to, we don't have control over the private businesses necessarily. So those stores, retail stores, restaurants, those kinds of places that are able to do curbside pickup or curbside delivery, that's one thing. Then internally at the city, we had last week before the announcement on Friday, at our Wednesday meeting, there was a lot of talk about boat launches, which ended up being opened by the province. But on Wednesday, it was still kind of unclear about whether we should do it or not. If the county was going to do it, we try to be on kind of the same page as them. So it has been really interesting. We're following, again, what the province is putting out, what the health unit is putting out in terms of data to figure out when we might start talking about reopening city facilities. So for example, there's going to be a larger conversation around out at the wellness center where there's been folks staying that were at the Brock or Cameron House or some of those shelters that they were moved out there to have more space to be able to actually distance. But there's going to be a time, not in the next month, I don't think, but eventually the wellness center is going to be able to reopen as a gym, as its, purpose is. So then we're having conversations about, well, how do we make sure that folks that are accessing the shelter system are still able to do it in a way that they're not so crammed together as they were prior to. So, finding space for that is, an ongoing a project for staff. What it's going to look like for summer, a lot of the summer leagues, like as we know, slow pitch normally would have started by now. I know it hasn't, but and we still don't know if it's going to, like, might there be the chance to have a partial season? Those are questions that we, again, because we are relying on the numbers and making sure that we're actually following through with the flattening of the curve. It makes it challenging because we're not able to provide everybody with that notice. We wish we could, but we just can't answer those questions as of yet. We kind of have to take it week by week. And so the provincial framework that they released a couple weeks ago that talks about moving in these 2-week intervals and then reevaluating the numbers and where things are at, and then deciding if additional things can reopen or what that looks like. We're following that very closely as well. And so that's been, I think, a helpful sort of roadmap for us to move forward. It's not ideal. Ideally, we would be able to tell everybody a specific date, and we just can't do that right now.
And just to clarify, and I think this is a very good, important point to bring up, is that municipalities on their own can't set those dates. It's not like ballparks and soccer fields can open in Peterborough and be closed in Norwood. Am I right?
Yeah.
That really has to come, it's a province-wide directive.
Yeah, and it's, it's challenging too, because you have cities, a city like Sudbury has a very different look and feel and less, travel or like people coming in and out than, a city like either Peterborough or someplace like, Burlington. So I know it's tricky for the province too, to be able to say like this has to apply all across because Ontario's so big and there's so many different cities and what that all looks like. But this, again, when we were talking about boat launches, it was like, well, if they're all still closed in the city, or sorry, in the county, and the city opens, are people then going to want to come get on the water through these boat launches? And then we're going to have too many people gathering there. Right. So it's similar for these other facilities. We've been, and again, going back to our conversation about having that ongoing communication, and our city reps and county reps are chatting, multiple times a week. We're chatting again with, as you know, every week with MVP Smith and MP Monsef about what directions are coming down from the province and the feds. And so, we know in the slow pitch league that we're in, there's people that come in there that come play in there from Bobcaygeon and from Norwood and from Apsley and wherever. Yes. So we want to make sure that when things are able to reopen, we're all sort of doing it at the same time.
I had an interesting conversation with a gentleman on the weekend that I bumped into, and he's a viewer of the show, so we thank him for that. Yeah. He indicated that he likes the show, which is great. But then the conversation turned towards you, and he said those two words that I'm sure you've heard too much of in the past. Diane's doing a good job, but she's too young. And you know what? I wish somebody would say that about me, actually. But and my answer to him was, "How do you mean?" Like, and he talked about inexperience and stuff like that. And you know what? I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but are you hearing that? And what's your response? I know what mine would be, but you're the mayor, so I'd love to hear yours.
I can tell you that my knees definitely don't feel young. I've got enough of that kind of pain, but that's something that I have heard since I got involved in politics, which is 6 years ago now, or more. When I first ran, it was 2013. So, that's one of those things where when you don't look like a sort of normal politician, people haven't seen young women be involved in a lot of, politics historically. So I think that that's always fascinating. When I ran for mayor, I had 4 years on council, which was more than some of my predecessors had in terms of that kind of experience. Mm-hmm. So, it's interesting. I get that kind of, criticism, not infrequently, but, I think I'm doing a good job and working with staff, and I'm always learning on the job, obviously, because, for example, coming into this and then having to deal with a pandemic wasn't something that necessarily could have been prepared for. That's true for everyone on council.
I was just going to say, no matter how much you experience that, you could have been
in council for 50 years and you wouldn't have had to deal with this kind of situation, right? And never mind the fact that we also, these days, one of the strengths that I bring is I'm used to, I've grown up in the millennial generation where I'm comfortable on technology. I'm able to adapt to these situations and figure out how we're going to be able to have these meetings, have this communication, all that kind of fun stuff. So,
and at the very least, you have the gift of eternal youth, according to some people. So
my hair is getting gray real quick, though, so I don't know.
Did you have anything you wanted to ask me? We come on here and I ask you questions every week, and you graciously answer them. Anything crossed your mind regarding myself and my role in the media?
Yeah, so we've talked about this turn the tables before, and obviously being a reporter in a crisis situation like this is a bit new as well. So what kind of pressure does that put on you? You used to be able to go out, walk downtown and ask folks, their opinion on different stories. You can't do that anymore. So how do you find sources? How do you figure out the best information, and how different is the job currently?
Yeah, well, the big focus right now for me personally has been covering information that's been put out by the Peterborough Public Health folks, and all that is done virtually. Although they do get together and at their office and media can come, but they're really encouraging media that need visuals to come.
Yeah, to come.
Since I don't, I'm able to do that from home and listen in by telephone. But you know, it has put, I know for my media colleagues, it has put new pressures on them in terms of how they collect news, people's accessibility. But you know, the job at the end of the day remains the same. You know, it's people talking, people communicating, making sure that message is communicated accurately and fairly. And those principles don't change. But the landscape sure has changed and is still changing.
Yeah.
I'll agree with what you said earlier. And I'm a little biased, but Peterborough is definitely very, very well served by its media.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. You've been watching Peterborough Matters here on your TV. Please join us next time.